Thank you very much for inviting me. Miriam, thank you very much for inviting me. Look, here's an unlikely question. Can human sewage be used to combat global warming, pollution, and pandemics? In other words, can a problem become part of a solution? And obviously, I'm not going to ask that question unless I think the answer is yes. And here is one example of where that solution is actually in use. This, as you can see, is a, well, you can't see, but the picture is a wastewater treatment plant. That is a fancy term for a human sewage treatment plant in an agricultural area of Denmark. What is interesting about this, it was an existing plant. They simply improved all of the processes. There is no rocket science here. They simply improved everything, including a simple device of putting in a cogenerator to burn the biogas that's going to produce biogas. All wastewater treatment plants produce some biogas, either deliberately or inadvertently. When it's inadvertently, they burn it off. Okay. All they did was ameliorate every piece of the process, so they produce they claim, 50% more energy than they actually use. What do they do with the excessive biogas? They use it to run garbage trucks to go and pick up residential garbage and agricultural industrial garbage to make more biogas. So what they have there is one loop of a circular economy. They have demonstrated that it can be done simply by taking existing technology and improving it. Here's another example. This is also in Denmark. This, as you see, is an actual city. It's a port city. It's the same deal. They produce 50% more energy than they consume. This one does not bring in any household waste. This strictly uses the human waste in the sewage system, in the sewer system, and still produces 50% more energy than they need to run the plant, which they use the extra energy to run the water system for the city. They're hoping to further improve the whole system so that they can run 100% of the water system. Now, what this means is that what these two examples show is that these sewage plants are in fact energy production plants. And at the same time, they so obliterate the toxins in the sewage that they actually use the residue that's left over as fertilizer in the agricultural areas around there. Now, maybe you won't want to drink Danish beer after you hear that, but that is what they do. So this system really works well. Most wastewater treatment plants, in fact, essentially all the others worldwide, to my knowledge, use more energy than they produce. They simply have not been improved the way those other two have been. They could be. Almost every one of them could become energy positive if money were spent to do it. This is a very good one in Sweden, run by really good people. They just haven't had the money to fix it up. Okay. Biogas is what's produced in these things, exactly the biogas that we have heard from other speakers, except this is biogas not agricultural. This is biogas produced right here in Barcelona, right? In all the cities of the world are producing this biogas, but it's just being wasted. If you pull the CO2 out of biogas, it's about 60% methane, maybe 70% methane. If you pull the CO2 out, it has almost exactly the same energy as a liter of diesel. Almost exactly the same, except diesel is vastly more expensive. What do you do? I'll get back to that in a second. What do you do with the wasted CO2? Right now, nothing. Nothing at all. It's just wasted. It doesn't have to be. Corinne Lepage, a former French Minister of Environment, and I proposed a plan to use wasted CO2. We were talking about the kind you've heard earlier from an agricultural biogas plant, but it could easily be hooked up to an urban biogas plant, like the two I just showed you in Denmark. That factory over there in the picture, that is a place that produces methane from waste CO2. I won't go into how it's done, but this could be, it's easy to do. Again, it's not rocket science. Everything is there to do this. This system could be hooked up to the existing wastewater treatment plants all over the world. And you would get, by the way, another 50% biogas from it. All right. Now, you can see here that biogas from wastewater treatment plants is as cheap as wind energy. Wind energy is actually, according to the latest Lazar report, which is where this came from, wind energy is the cheapest new energy source. Biogas is almost as cheap. It might be as cheap now because I don't have an updated figure from IRENA on it. But you can see it's really cheap. Agricultural biogas is much more expensive. Much more expensive. Why? Because urban biogas, the kind that could be produced right here in Barcelona, the system to collect the raw material is the sewer system. It's already there. It's already being paid for by somebody else. So the biogas producer doesn't have to accumulate the raw material. All right. Now, if you take the biogas produced from an energy negative plant, in other words, one where you still need outside energy to produce it, you can have biogas. Sweden has a whole bunch of biogas stations. That Bus is a place in England where they're running this thing. Yes, it works. It's probably a bad idea. Why is it a bad idea? Because vehicles in the next 10 years, 20 years for sure, they're all going to be electric. The cars, the buses, the trucks. How do I know that? Because that's where billions are going in new investment. Volkswagen is turning the company into an electric car company. So to invest in this kind of system is probably not a good idea. Biogas is a fabulous idea. There are plenty of uses besides running trucks and automobiles. Okay, so what does all of this have to do? Look, first thing, the biogas helps to produce from human sewage, helps to combat global warming because you aren't burning fossil fuels to produce that amount of energy. Okay. It helps to deal with pollution because these plants reduce the toxins in what would otherwise be dumped into the oceans to a level that it is harmless. It's so harmless it's actually used as fertilizer. So, global warming is a way to combat it. Pollution, a way to combat it. What about pandemics? All right, you might recognize the lady on the left there. She is the person who put the term sustainable development, which we've heard a lot about today, correctly, should have heard a lot about it. She's the one who put that term in common usage. And what is she talking about now? When a person is that important, who has had that much of an impact on our thinking, it'd be interesting to hear what she's talking about now. What she's talking about now is pandemics. She thinks that the world is facing massive pandemics. She thinks, and this is an annual report, she and the gentleman there are head of a committee that puts out an annual report. I urge you to read this report. It's the World Health Organization. You can find it there. She thinks 80 million people are going to be wiped out in a pandemic. But there won't just be one. There will be pandemic after pandemic after pandemic, because we are facing a situation exactly similar to the one Europe was in the Middle Ages, when 2/3 of the population of England was wiped out in pandemics, the Black Death. All right, that's what she's worried about. And the reason is poor sanitations in slums. That will aggravate the spread of an infectious pathogen. The one she's worried about is an airborne influenza. If you've been following the press lately, the bubonic plague, the Black Death, is back with us now. It made it into the newspapers yesterday. That's because all of this human waste, which is what was feeding the rats during the medieval Europe, is back. Where is it back? Every one of those red dots in the developing world is a city of 10 million or more. You can see some in South America, in West Africa, in the Indian subcontinent, and elsewhere. You can see one where I live in New York, another one where I'm from, LA. Those places have wastewater treatment plants. They're not as good as those Danish ones that I mentioned, but they have something. They have a defense against a spread of a terrible pathogen. Those other cities don't. Rio de Janeiro, for example, has hundreds of thousands of people living next to a big city. No sewers. They can pipe in water. They don't pipe out the unpleasant smelling substance. It just sits there. That's where the plagues are going to start, in places like that. Here's the hard facts on this story. About 1 billion persons, 14% of the entire global population, they have toilets, but they don't lead anywhere. They don't lead to sewers. So that system that I just described can't even be applied. It can't be applied. Those places are just waiting for a new Black Death. And 2 billion people, they have neither toilets nor sewers. So if the international community is really interested in an energy transformation, which I think everybody in this room is, the place to start is actually right here in Barcelona, in every city in Europe and North America, where we already have this sewer system. Turn those sewers, turn the wastewater treatment plants into energy production places. And then go to these developing places where there are these slums and help them to build sewers and then install those plants. Then they have energy and sanitation. And we protect them? Yes, but that's incidental. We protect us. Because those plagues that are coming our way, according to the woman who put the term sustainable development into our vocabulary, those plagues that are coming our way can be avoided, at least to a huge degree. So, thank you very much.